Recording in progress.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. I'm going to start over.
Go ahead.
Oh, freedom.
I think we might have a sound issue, Sandra. You're on mute. Okay, guys, take 3. Welcome everybody to
God.
2021. No problem. Yesterday we had a Zoom where the whole thing didn't happen and we had to change the link. We're gonna make it. It's all right. For those of you coming in, I'm Jodi Rudoren, editor-in-chief of The Forward. Welcome. We are gonna start off with a song. Rabbi Sandra Lawson is gonna bring us in, so sit back. While she's playing, you can post in the chat a little bit about who you are and where you're from, what's your connection, why you're here, why you've come to this event.
All right. Hi, everybody. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home, my Lord, and be free. No more moaning, no more moaning, no more moaning over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home, my Lord, and be free. They'll be singing, they'll be singing, they'll be singing over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home, my Lord, and be free. They'll be shouting, they'll be shouting, they'll be shouting over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home, my Lord, and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'll go home, my Lord, and be free.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Lawson, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Once again, I'm Jodi Rudoren, editor-in-chief of The Forward. And I'm really excited because, oh, I'm echoing. Are people hearing me echo? No, it's not bad for you? Okay, well, I'll try to deal with it. Anyway, this is our second annual Juneteenth conversation. And I went back this morning and was rewatching our Juneteenth conversation from last year with Rabbi Lawson and our amazing contributing columnist Tema Smith, who's with us. And I said at the end that I wanted to get them on the hook for doing another event this year. I had forgotten that I tried to get them on the hook right that day. But I'm glad that we were able to bring it back. And I hope some of you in the audience were also with us a year ago. So couple of programming notes. First of all, Gabby Brooks, thank you so much for hosting this. Can you can you spotlight all of us now so that people can see the three of us while I introduce everybody? And just great to use the chat for comments throughout the program. Please make sure you're chatting to panelists and attendees so that everybody can see whatever you're saying. If you want to talk directly to just us, or just me, you can of course use panelists or just my name. And if you have a question that you want me to ask, bring up in the conversation, it's best to use the Q&A button rather than the chat because those stay there longer. It's a little easier to navigate. We are live now on Facebook. Gabby posted in the chat and we'll repeat that so that you can share that on your own Facebook pages or on Twitter or however you like to share things so that more and more people can join us. And you will be getting a video recording of this in your inbox soon, along with whatever links we post in the chat so that you don't have to worry if you miss anything. We'll get it back for you. Gabby, sorry to be a nudge, but I'm just seeing Sandra on the screen. So if you can add me and Tema, that would be awesome. But I'm going to start by introducing Rabbi Sandra Lawson, who is an amazing, she has so many different identities that I introduce her as. She's a rabbi, she's a personal trainer, she's vegan, many other things. And last year when she was here, she was an associate chaplain at Elon University. But just a couple of months ago, she started a new gig, a historic new gig at Reconstructing Judaism, where she is the first ever diversity, equity, inclusion officer or director of diversity, equity, whatever.
Yeah.
Chief head honcho, bottle washer regarding DEI. And we're going to be talking to her about how that's going and what it looks like. And then we also have with us Tema Smith, who is a contributing columnist to The Forward, as well as director of, what did you say? I forget.
Professional development.
Professional development at 18 Doors, which is the leading, I think, interfaith group serving interfaith families and leading advocacy and exploration of interfaith issues in our community. And Tema is dialing in from Canada, and so we're international just in our makeup here. I want to say also that since a year ago, we've been really lucky that Rabbi Lawson has increased her connection to The Forward and recently joined our Forward Association, which is our governing board supporting our journalism and all we do and helping to advise us. And Tema, I want to tell you, I'm sorry to embarrass you in front of else, but one of the things, when I was interviewing for a new opinion editor, we asked people all the candidates to assess our current slate of columnists. And to a person, they said, I love Tema Smith, but she doesn't write enough. We need her to write more. So I wanted you to know that your public is desperate for more Tema. So
tell that to my writer's block.
So we, not just us editors, but the readers really want more Tema Smith in their inbox and on their website too. So again, thank you for being with us. I know everybody's busy. So as I said, I went back to our Zoom from 2020 and looked at some of what we said. And what I asked you at the end, I asked each of you to imagine that we were back here together a year later. What would your hopes be about what would be different? And Tema answered first. I'm going to start with Tema. You noted that there were 4,000 people signed up for the Kabbalat Shabbat service. It was that night because we were doing it on a Friday. And you said if 4,000 people sign up again in 2021, we'll know something has shifted, has really changed. You also talked about how people were feeling fatigued in sort of allyship, and that sometimes the task of racial justice in our communities felt overwhelming. And you said it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that we weren't going to solve structural racism tomorrow. We weren't going to come back a year later and see there was no more structural racism. But that as we worked on structural racism, both inside the Jewish community and outside, because we have to do both at the same time, you said, that there should be signs of progress. There should be tangible signs of progress that we can point to a year later, some real markers. And you said that for me would not be, is not enough, but it would be enough if there were tangible markers. So I ask you, are there tangible markers that you see in our communities, in your life, in your world, that make you feel like things have changed or are continuing to change over this year? And what are they?
Sure. I wish I knew how many people had registered for that Kabbalat Shabbat. I should have asked before coming on. Maybe I'll be able to get an answer before the end of this. I might text some people and see what I can find out. But I think, for me, some of the big changes have been Sandra's new position. The reform movement also hired a similar position, Yolanda Savage-Narva, who's doing phenomenal work. And I was recently part of a committee at the World Union for Progressive Judaism, programming with sort of an inclusion lens, a diversity and inclusion lens, which was brought, to this global conference, and really being able to see that lens being a priority. I know that Jewish Federations of North America is making this a priority. So we're seeing a lot of shifts inside our legacy organizations. And, I'm speaking, of course, of what faces inward into the Jewish community, of people ready to sort of start doing the hard work, which is really exciting in so many ways. Externally, what I'll say is I'm relieved to see. I thought that things would sort of peter out more quickly than they have. And I am seeing some signs of people being like, well, we have a different government now, there's less urgency, some of that. And I'm going to say to you, there's still urgency, please, and thank you. But it's less of a die out of the attention than I expected. And so that is exciting. And of course, material circumstances elsewhere, Derek Chauvin was convicted. The cop who killed George Floyd, and I believe the sentencing should be next week, I believe. But that is huge. And last year we were speaking not long after George Floyd's murder, and it feels heavy and big that this year we're speaking after his murderer was convicted of a crime, and of the highest level of the crime he was charged with. That feels, yes, it's one, but it feels huge.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was surprised when I went back and watched it to realize actually how short a time after George Floyd's murder we were talking, like 19 days, right? Or something. No, that's not the right date. 25 days, something like that. Anyway, and I was like, wow, there was a lot happened in those few weeks even. But yeah, it's really amazing to be talking now a couple of months after that murder conviction. Sandra, you also talked about a marathon last year. You actually called it a turtle marathon, which I guess is an ultra slow marathon. And I'm interested in what markers, concrete markers of progress you see, but I just want to also quote back one of the things that you said. You said, I really want Jews of color, Jews of marginalized identity, to have the privilege of walking into any Jewish space to pray, to be Jewish. I want the Jewish community to look internally. We do a good job of showing up for immigration protests and prison protests. People don't want to do the internal work because that's the hardest, to open ourselves up to the fragility of learning or unlearning our racist past so that our children, even some older generations, can walk into some Jewish spaces and feel safe. So specifically, and I'm mindful of the piece you wrote for us about never walking into a Jewish space without being questioned. Has that shifted? Has that changed for you, for other Jews that you know, Jews of color, and whatever other markers of change you see? You're muted again, Sandra.
It's not my day. Thank you for having this conversation again and now giving us an opportunity to sort of reflect. And I do agree with Tema that things have shifted and things have changed. And as far as walking into a Jewish space, I mean, not too many people are walking into Jewish spaces. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when we all sort of reemerge back into our regular spaces. And, I think when we look, just looking back and the fact that it was so such a short time after George Floyd was murdered, there was a lot going on. We were like completely locked down. And then, George Floyd was on the back of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And by the time we got the George Floyd, I think people who would normally look for a non-racist reason for George Floyd's murder were sort of at a loss because they watched a murder play out, and many of our society were hurt by that, and it caused many people to question that our society is not equitable, or if they realize from the beginning that our society is not equitable, they realize they can't just sit back anymore. And since then, I mean, I've seen. I used to have this habit of going through progressive Jewish organizations and looking at their board and looking at their staff. And, at this time last year, many of those organizations were still overwhelmingly white, and still a lot of them were still heavily male. Now, many of those organizations have someone like me smiling, and some of them have more than one person. And, and just to add, because I'm really excited about our new Vice President of Academic Affairs, when I was telling Lauren when she talked to me the other day from the forward, I said, yes, it's awesome that Amanda, Dr. Amanda is a Black woman. But this is also a testament to when you commit to casting a wide net, you commit to creating a diverse candidate pool. That means you reach out to other networks. You don't just keep using the same networks you have and keep recycling the same people over and over again. People who may not be on your radar, who are overwhelmingly qualified, they show up. And so, I don't believe that Amanda thought of us, and I know that we weren't really thinking of her, like our Jewish organizations weren't really thinking of her. And we found her and reached out to her, and she beat, not that people were fighting, but like, we're talking a candidate pool that was, everyone that made it to the final rounds would have been great in that job, but she shined and more importantly, impressed the student body, who is a hard body to impress. And at the end of the day, there was no other candidate that, that really could have taken that job. And it also shows what can happen when you look past race, because there's still many organizations that can't see past race, and they can't see hiring someone like me. And the fact that, we're growing in racial diversity, they're gonna, there's gonna be more Jews of color coming through the ranks, and will be in positions of leadership unless if we continue our racist sort of past and don't help Jews of color feel comfortable in Jewish spaces, we're going to lose talent. That means we're going to lose future executive directors, future editors-in-chief, future rabbis, because they're going to get fed up. And I don't want to lose talent. They're only 2.2% of the population. I mean, we need all the talent we can have. So.
Sandra, I wanted to ask you about your new job a little bit, because it's really interesting to me. I mean, at the risk of embarrassing you, you're wearing a t-shirt that says, "This is what Jewish looks like," right? You can show us.
Yeah.
So in your past job, you were an associate chaplain. You weren't the Black associate chaplain. You weren't actually even the Jewish chaplain, right? But you were, by your very existence, doing the diversity thing, showcasing the diversity of Jewish leadership, in a kind of like in exactly the representational way that you just described. Like, we should have Jews of color in all kinds of positions that have nothing to do with race or diversity in this.
Mhm.
And now you're doing this job that has race and diversity in the title, and your job is more frontally about doing it, not by osmosis, not by your existence, but frontally. And I wonder how that talk about that, the shift, or how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, personally, for you and the whole world here, whoever's listening, I love being a chaplain. I love working. I love the energy on a campus. It was great to learn things from young people who are always willing to push you in directions you may not think you need to go, and to be a witness to them as they were entering college. And for many of them, it was the first time leaving their Jewish community. That was an awesome experience, and to be that was great. George Floyd, that time period of last year was a turning point for me. And I started to think about where I could best serve. The more personal note is that so I've been a rabbi now for 3 years, and I had applied for a congregational position right before I was being ordained. Racism interfered with that position. I got my job at Elon. A year into that position, I was invited to apply for another position, which both of these positions I was well qualified for. The difference was that this congregation presented itself as a more forward-thinking congregation, and I made it to the finish line, and racism interfered again. And from that experience, I was hurt. I was really hurt by that, and I was, and I thought, and I also want to say that I do believe that congregations have every right to pick whoever they need to pick, but I also don't want racism to interfere with that. I want to alleviate that. And so I remember telling myself, my wife, something's going to come out of this. I don't know what, and I need to grieve this. But I was angry and hurt.
Can I ask you, Sandra? I really appreciate that you're sharing a personal story, and I know that it was hard. When you say racism interfered, can you be a little bit more specific?
Yeah, it was told to me that by someone who knows these things, like somebody I trust, that the head of the hiring committee, or someone on the hiring committee, said that our community is not ready for a Black rabbi.
Right. And I think you told me this once before, and you said that they were worried that the people would not see you as the person they could rabbi with or whatever, based solely on identity.
Yeah, but
not about your Torah or whatever, not about your teaching, or it's just really basically about who you are.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think people twist themselves all up in knots trying to make something not racist when it actually is. When people get angry because I'm a candidate, and then tell themselves because I'm a candidate that's been a rabbi for not even a year or whatever, that's not, why would somebody be angry about that? So I, when I was trying to figure out what to do, I reached out to a mentor, and she suggested DEI. And then I had a conversation with the folks at Reconstructing Judaism who are already thinking about this. And we were able to make it happen with some support of the JOC initiative.
Cool. And Tema, you've actually, you've been in the job a little bit longer, but I think it's also true for you. You worked in variety of different, you worked at synagogue and other organizations where your existence was a fact of being a Black Jewish person, being a product of a mixed family. And now you're working with and for mixed families. How do you see the importance of both things?
Yeah, I think when I first got into Jewish communal work, a lot of it was because I had never seen anyone like me doing Jewish communal work. And I wanted to make it possible for other people like me to see themselves represented in the community, and also to actively reach out. I had been looking for Jewish community. And it so happened the first congregation that I worked at was a very supportive congregation that was interested in reaching out to interfaith families, to racially diverse families, because that was at the core of who they were. And so when I started, it was sort of very natural. And then I went on to sort of continue that trajectory. And now I'm just like so honored every day to be able to, I mean, what my job is to move Jewish organizations along their journey of inclusion, and specifically around interfaith families. But we know now from the recent Pew data that 8% of interfaith families are multiracial. If you look at that Jews by no religion category, which is super fraught, it's 16%. This is a significant number of people. And of course, that's only the interracial families. That's not families that might be interfaith and have two people of the same race in them. There's no, I'm sure somebody could run those numbers for me and tell me what those are, but I do not have them handy. I am not a math person.
I want to mention, as you're talking about that Tema, there was something that Amanda Babuji, is that how you say it? Said in the interview with the Forward that I just put in the chat regarding the Pew study that I thought was so important to remember. She's pointed out that survey and other surveys ask Jews if they are members of a household where one member is not white. They don't at all consider the idea of a family where nobody's white. And it's like one step forward, two steps back, I guess. I don't know. It's really interesting. Like, duh. Why is it only a focus on multiracial or whatever? So anyway, sorry to interrupt you, but
right, and it's really challenging. You know, when we're looking at these studies and surveys, there's so much that we don't know based on the Pew survey. That is one thing we don't know. In the line of work that I'm in, I always say we know absolutely nothing. We know some stuff about a Jewish person who was married to somebody who wasn't Jewish. We know some stuff about if that person is racially other. It also doesn't really, it feels like that data point also might not consider if the Jew is a person of color married to somebody who is white. It's unclear to me how that shakes out in that data. But we know very little about a person in a household who isn't Jewish, for example, even though it's a Jewish household, and presumably their existence in the household is shaping the way that Jewish is done. And so there's all sorts of complicated things there. But when I think about some of these questions around you know, our diversifying community, I also think of the Pew data that shows that once you get under 30, and I don't have the exact statistic in front of me, but it is a significant.
I think someone just put it in the chat. Barry Joseph, thank you so much. 29% of Jewish adults under 30 live in households in which at least one person is Black, Hispanic, Asian. Actually, so it does say at least one other, it looks like. Yes. So thank you, Barry. Nice going.
Barry Joseph is very happy.
Gold star to Barry Joseph for being on it. Thank you. Anyone else who would like to put any random statistics from Pew or relevant statistics from Pew in the chat would be awesome. And I saw that Gabby just posted our article with some key takeaways. And Amy Wigley is asking if you'll be able to get a copy of this recording. And the answer is yes, it will arrive in your inbox, and even in the inboxes of people who signed up but couldn't make it in the end. And we would be delighted if you would then share it with your friends on social media. So we titled this talk really simply and basic, right? How far we've come, how much more work we have to do. So let's talk about the second part, right? Let's talk about what are you most focused on this Juneteenth and for the next, I don't know, what are your quarterly goals? Now, what are your next big targets of thinking like, we got to do work here, here, and here?
Yeah, for me, it's simple and hard at the same time, mostly hard, but simple to state. You know, I'm really, I want to move our congregations, the Reconstructionist congregations, and my conversation with Yolanda, hopefully we're working together, move our congregations towards anti-racism and helping our congregations recognize racism, because that's something that I'm starting to learn, that many people just don't know what is racist. And also, you know, being really mindful of the beautiful rainbow tapestry that are our future rabbis that are in rabbinical school and trying to get in rabbinical school. You know, I want a better environment for them when they go to internships and when they seek employment after they're ordained. So just make everybody not racist. Like, that's easy.
Well, I'm sure we'll get there by next Juneteenth. So But with you in the job, I'm totally confident. So, we'll be celebrating that a year from now. Tema, I want to hear your priorities and focuses, but I want to just remind folks, because I see Janine has put a question in the chat. I want to ask you guys, I would love to have your questions. Please use the Q&A button, which is a few over from the chat, for your questions so that I don't lose track of them. And continue to chat to attendees in the chat. But Tema, what work do we have to do?
Everything that Sandra said, and then some. You know, one of the biggest things that I have said to people who I've worked with specifically on the topic of race is this is not, like we concluded with last year, this is not a sprint. This is a 10-year process. And then you're going to start a new 10-year process, and then you're going to start a new 10-year process. Because the work of equity and the work of justice and the work of making everyone feel seen as themselves in spaces is never going to be a one and done, and the landscape is going to keep changing, and it's going to continuously be something that we need to engage in. And I say that about everyone, right? That what a synagogue is doing now to engage its like typical synagogue membership, in quotes, typical, stereotypical, I should say, is drastically different than what was happening 10 years ago, right? And for some reason, though, we don't sort of compute that that's an evolving process of strategic planning, implementing that strategic plan, measuring how it played out, and then doing a new strategic plan. And essentially, the work of doing that diversity and inclusion work is the same thing. It's just with a particular lens, and ideally that gets incorporated into the broader planning. What I think is still to be done is I still think that a lot of communities need to take seriously that this is something we're not doing that well on yet. We're paying attention, which is great. That's the first step. But there hasn't been a sea change in a year. There's been a shift in the tide, which is great. But again, like Sandra mentioned before, we're not going to know really what the experience of Black Jews walking into Jewish spaces is going to be until we're actually walking into those spaces again. And my guess is not everyone's been paying attention to what's gone on in the last year. So we're going to have some changes that we need to continue to make as part of our sort of re-entry to normal times, whatever that's going to look like, the new normal. And I think that's going to be really significant and a point where we can really start to look and tell what's shifted over this last year. I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm also really excited.
I also want to say too that just to add to this, that there was a recent opinion piece by two wonderful researchers in the New York Times last week, and then Code Switch did a whole story on it that shows that support for Black Lives Matter is below where it was in January 2020. You know, and I think I personally think that it will bounce back to where it was, but I think there's a lot, like, you know, the new president, you know, people, I think the messaging from the right, you know, I think people are tired. Oh, racism again, come on. I mean, like, but that is really sad. And that shows that, you know, our work is about to get harder.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that really quickly. I mean, one of the places that I'm seeing it that is so concerning to me is this campaign against critical race theory. For so many reasons. First of all, nobody in elementary and high school is learning critical race theory. Critical race theory is an academic legal framework that is a specialization. But essentially, you know, I've seen some conversations. I saw recently somebody say, like, why do we have to talk about what was bad? Let's just tell the history the way it is. And people pointed to, like, well, that's actually what the 1619 Project had tried to do. And everyone said that was anti-white racism. So what are we doing here when, how are we telling these stories? How is there accountability for the past in different ways when every time that gets brought up, it turns into, like, why are these people being negative and trying to shift society? There's NBC just also did some really phenomenal investigative reporting about lots of uber conservative think tanks and organizations pouring money into this campaign against critical race theory.
Wow.
And like, pay attention to this, because I think this is going to be, first of all, I also think that it's, and maybe this will be what I write about one of these days. I also think that it's anti-Semitic, the attack on critical race theory, because it gets traced back to Jewish Marxist thinkers. And, you know, that should be an alarm bell in the Jewish community when we keep going back to blaming the Jews for putting this idea in the Black community's head. That should be a huge alarm bell.
And one more thing, like some of these same people complain about people wanting to remove Confederate statues or Confederate monuments that were placed, many of them were placed in the early part of the 20th century, the latter part of the 19th century, and saying that we're erasing history, and that is not even history. And but yeah, this whole, thank you, Tema, for bringing that up. This whole like, yeah, I'm scared that like, you know, that people are really pushing harder to not tell a full story of our history.
So I was trying to decide whether my next question should be the more softball, how are you going to observe Juneteenth, or if I should go with the tougher political question that I have. And you guys both led me to say we should stick with the tough stuff for a minute. And Maya Denola actually just put into the chat something very similar to the question. So a year ago, when we were having this conversation, and in many conversations that were happening at the time, one of the things that somebody almost always brought up from the audience was this question about the movement for Black Lives and the 2016 thing about BDS. And I really thought then that felt like a canard, like a kind of a distraction. It was like an organizational weirdness that had been all worked out. It's complicated, whatever. But I think there is something different going on right now for a lot of really progressive Jews. And I want to admit that my universe of understanding this is primarily white. It may be also happening with Jews of color. You guys will tell me more. And here's how I would describe it. I live in a place, and I'm in many spaces of folks who definitely since George Floyd, but maybe before, we're like really focused on anti-racism, and have really, again, especially since George Floyd, they were like woken up, and they are like all in. They have Black Lives Matter signs on their lawns. They were at protests last summer despite the pandemic. They have been working on their synagogue boards or whatever boards they're on to institute DEI programs. They are like fully engaged with, and maybe some of it is like, I want to wear my anti-racist pin. I'm not saying it's 100% like deep, but that they have become like deeply engaged in this fight. It reflects their Jewish values. They are talking to their kids about the importance of being part of this struggle. And many of them are talking about it, about how it connects to anti-Semitism and racism, anti-Semitism being linked. And they feel like this allyship is super important to them. It's like been the defining political element of the last year. And in May, when the Israel-Gaza escalation happened, they found that the communities they have been deeply engaged in were defining not just being supportive of Palestinian human rights, which most of these liberal Zionists were always, and very engaged in the idea of loving Israel and criticizing its treatment of Palestinians, but they were really defining Israel's existence as structurally racist and defining the Palestinian struggle as core to the Black Lives Matter movement, and defining that really in opposition to Israel as a Jewish democracy. And I think many of them found themselves like quite surprised by the extent to which that was linked and integrated. And it wasn't about a platform that had been taken out. It was about like what was happening. And then we also saw some anti-Semitic incidents are deriving directly out of some of those protests, as you well know. And I feel like many, again, white liberal Jews are like really caught surprised, and really trying to now figure out like, what does this mean for me? These two things are core to my identity, to my Jewish values, connecting, being a progressive supporter of Israel and being a progressive supporter of anti-racism. And now I'm being told that those are in conflict in a new way. So are you seeing people grappling with this too? And help us grapple, please.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I had a conversation with a white Jewish leader of an organization that's very well known, who had said to me that until she, after talking with me, she had to change her heart, but that didn't understand. I show up for Black Lives Matter. I show up for this Why aren't Black people showing up for anti-Semitism? My simple answer to this is that even though I think the white Jewish community has moved and is doing a lot of the outward stuff, which is very easy. It is easy to show up to a protest. It's easy to take a selfie. It's easy to tweet, I'm getting arrested. The hard work is, I question people who say this. Do you actually have relationships with people of color? Because if you have relationships with people of color, you can engage in these kinds of conversations. And you would also understand that anti-Semitism is woven into the fabric of our country because we live in a Christian-centric society, just like racism is woven in our society. But if you want, one, allyship should not be conditional. You should be supporting allies because it's the right thing to do. But if you're in a relationship with someone and they say something that's anti-Semitic, that is an opportunity for growth and learning for both people. And that's where we need to go. Building relationships is hard. And I'm jokingly saying this, but because it was so cute. Someone said to me, who's a friend of mine, that she had a friend, she's a white friend, but white woman is a close friend of mine. She had a friend who said to her, I get it. How do I make friends? And that's hard. Yeah. It is hard. And so maybe when people show up for protests, they actually talk to people. Like it's a turn.
It's also worth saying that you don't have to, in an actual relation, in a personal relationship, mm-hmm. You don't have to agree on everything.
No.
And in an allyship, in a political relationship, you can be completely united on one issue and have some differences on another issue and survive that. But I do think that both seem so core to people's identities that they're having trouble holding it together.
Like one of my mentors told me once, I'll just say it because I hope he's not embarrassed, but his name is Joshua Lesser, was a gay rabbi, one of the first, went to Atlanta, started, supporting Black ministers, showing up for Black protest. I'm sure many of them didn't understand the Jewish thing, probably thought he was going to hell because he was gay. But when he called and needed something, because he had invested building those relationships, they're like, hey, I may not agree with this, but I'm showing up because you asked me and we're in a relationship and it's important to you, therefore it's important to me. And Heschel didn't just show up on that bridge.
Right.
Like he didn't just okay, I'm here.
Well, and you had the same experience yourself when you organized Southern clergy last spring after George mm-hmm. Floyd to speak out, and it had a lot to do with the relationships you'd built, to sign a very strongly worded letter, if I recall. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tema, what are you seeing in this issue of how the Palestinian-Israeli issue has been connected to the anti-racism movement?
Yeah, so one of the things that keeps coming, but this isn't new. This goes back to the 60s and 70s. This is not some new development. What I feel like is new is that there is broader Jewish community investment in sort of social justice. When I say there were always Jews who were deeply engaged in social justice, but it's become part of the broader lexicon of American Jewish life. And so, yes, there is an alarming rise in anti-Semitism tied to what just happened and will likely flare up and happen again, as we saw with more strikes and incendiary balloons and all of this. We're probably due for another horrendous flare up. And I think the reality is that because it is so core to people's identities, it is going to remain in tension. I can echo everything that Sandra said, and I also think that one of the big challenges is that our inclination is to think that all these preconditions have to be met before we can step into spaces. But I was on a panel, it feels like forever ago, but I guess it was probably might have been 2019, even 2018. I don't remember. The pandemic has warped time. But Rabbi Angela Bookdahl of Central Synagogue was on the panel with me. And she said, we were talking about social justice movements. We were talking about Black Lives Matter. And she said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? We have to be there. And so by sort of stepping out of spaces, we are saying, have this conversation in our absence. So I think that's a really important piece of it. The other thing, though, I just want to say, though, is what is really challenging for Black Jews to hear is I'm picking my Zionist identity over your safety and your existence, and that's really painful. Because basically what we're hearing is that we can't support both things at the same time because of some things that are happening within a grassroots movement. Another thing that I think is really important to understand is that, yes, there is an organization called Black Lives Matter, but it's essentially a grassroots movement where there isn't sort of an overarching set of messages. People show up to marches who are anti-Semitic, right?
I think what you said, but Tema, I just want to stop you for a second, because I'm really not talking about the flare up in anti-Semitism as much as the core connection that a lot of activists in the anti-racism movement are bringing to the Israel-Palestine question. Because I think the framing you just said is so important. This idea of choosing a Zionist identity over your safety, over Black people's safety, because I think that some people are actually feeling the reverse, right? Which is this idea, because if your framing on Israel-Palestine has to do with again, I really think when I'm talking about liberal Zionists who really support Palestinians and two states and human rights, I really am talking about that universe. But if you believe that the Jewish state's survival is at stake, and that the new framing within the anti-racism movement is about there should not be a Jewish state, then that framing that you offered is sort of the same, right? Because that's about Jew safety, right? There's some notion that. And so I think it is, the stakes are really high for this conversation to find a way for people for the same people to coexist in both spaces, right? I think there's a large universe of progressive Jews who want to exist in the anti-racism movement and continue to believe in a Jewish state.
I also want to add too that there are Black and brown people, some of them are Jews, who are pro-Zionist, Zionist, anti-Zionist, and non-Zionist, just like the rest of the Jewish world.
Right.
And just like, so it's not like the hyper focus on Black people or people of color, it really saddens me because.
And by the way, many of the folks in the anti-racist movement who are making it, synonymous with a pro-Palestinian stance that includes potentially no Jewish state are white. I mean, it's not right. A Black thing. I'm just saying the tying, it's between ideologies. Right. All right. We're doing so well, but we got to go. We have a lot of questions from the chat, but while I look at them, I want you to each briefly tell me how you will be observing this holiday.
I will be on a screen.
And are there 4,000 people signed up again, or tell us?
I did send a text. I don't know if I got anything back. Did you get anything back to me? But no, I will. I will be doing the Juneteenth event with Lawson that features some amazing, talented people from the Jewish community. And I get to support my local community. I'm supporting local clergy, and we will be at a park not far from where I live, and I get to sing, and we're going to talk, and I'm going to be offering a prayer of resilience and talking about Juneteenth.
I sit in the funny position of being north of the border where Juneteenth is a thing for nobody. But that said, 18 Doors is partnering with Lawson on the Juneteenth Shabbat. So I will definitely be popping by on screen or to watch the screen of that. And I'm planning to spend the day reading. I've got some books that I've been meaning to get to that are on themes of race and racism that I'm hoping to dive into. And also, full confession, I'm a horrific procrastinator, and I am taking a DEI certificate, and my assignments are due on Tuesday. So I'm going to be writing about how organizations can engage in DEI. So very appropriate for
that's not bad
weekend.
All right. Well, Tema, if you can put some of the books that you're going to be reading into the chat, that'd be awesome. And if anybody else would like to share in the chat what they plan to do. And the Forward published a story this morning on various events that are available, which I believe Gabby, nope, she posted something else. But so Gabby just posted in the chat the Lawson resources, and she will, I'm sure, soon post the article that we have that is that plus some other things. And I'm going to turn to some of our audience question. Barry Speart asks, what role does gender play in Jewish communal hiring for Jews of color?
So so one thing I'll say about that is that, and somebody actually wrote this in the other thing, and I private chatted them the answer. So when you're talking about someone who's Black and also queer and also a woman, the intersectionality of that basically, in short, creates new types of discrimination. So I'm not discriminated just because I'm a woman or just because I'm Black, but there's like this whole other layer. And the other thing I've learned recently is that when it comes to gender discrimination in hiring, that women, I'm trying to remember, I'm pausing because I'm trying to remember where I got this from, but women are hired based off of experience, or proven experience, where men are hired for potential. And so that plays out often into the jobs that women may apply for because of how we're socialized. So
I read something else that's similar where women will read a job spec and look at that qualification list and think like, oh, I guess I can apply for this job because I don't have those things. And men are like, I'll figure that out or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So so the intersections of my identity, basically, I'm not treated as if I'm just a woman or just a Black person. It's like a different level of discrimination, but still discrimination nonetheless.
So I actually read this question in a slightly different way. I appreciate your answer. No, but I actually read it I was thinking that it feels to me, and partly I'm thinking about you and Dr. Bucci and others, but I'm thinking, isn't it true that in the rabbinical schools that are open to women, they have majority women, and I feel like actually I'm wondering if the opposite is, I think I'm not trying to at all deny the racism that you're talking about. And I think pulpit positions, there's a sense that like that figure is supposed to be a man, similarly to like executive positions in politics. But I feel like in a lot of, obviously Ilana Kaufman running the Jews of Color Initiative, Marcella White Campbell running B'chol Hashon. I'm just thinking about like, is it true also that a lot of the leadership in the Jews of color community is also female?
Yeah, so like definitely in the Reconstruction movement, like the Reconstruction Rabbinical College is definitely run by women, and I say my language taught through a very feminist lens. That is not true, however, for many of the other progressive schools, and I'm not a member of those organizations. So if somebody corrects me and it says I'm wrong, I'm fine with that. But even though many of these schools may have more women applying, they still have more men in leadership positions, and I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon.
Tema, how do you see gender playing out in the sphere?
Yeah, I think that's what Sandra says is very accurate. I think we are seeing, also the URJ has a lot of women in sort of leadership level roles, a lot of women rabbis in leadership roles inside the institution. But when I look at sort of, I always find it really interesting that the reform movement puts out like a salary survey of rabbis. And when you look at the figure for senior rabbis of large congregations who are women, it's too small a number for them to break it out into the various things that they break out other senior rabbis into. So we are still looking at a bit of a glass ceiling. We are still looking, I think, and a lot of a glass ceiling. We are still looking at some of those challenges. And I think once you add race to the mix, we do end up with that sort of the origins of intersectionality. We're looking at how racism and misogyny come together to create unique forms of oppression against Black women. And I think that's very real. And I think it's a testament to that is that most of the Black women serving in leadership, Black Jewish women serving in leadership roles inside our community are in Jews of color spaces, or organizations like the URJ, the RAC, or Reconstructing Judaism, who have made racial justice part of their mandate and part of what they do.
They're not running APAC.
Right. We're not quite there yet.
Well, maybe that's Sandra's next job.
One thing I do want to say though, that is really encouraging to me is I hosted a panel yesterday, or a roundtable yesterday, for work that was, what people who work with interfaith families need to know about anti-Black racism. And I was able to pull together myself and my colleague, both of us are mixed race, and 3 other Jewish professionals. It was 4 women on the panel and 1 man who's a rabbinical student right now. And we all are mixed race or Black people working in Jewish spaces to build Jewish spaces. And like, I was the oldest by like at least 5 years, probably more, probably 10 years in some cases. And I'm just looking at this and, I think I said more than once, like, this is like mind-boggling, right? This is 10 years down the line. Our leadership looks totally different. And
yeah, another thing
shapes
that
out.
I saw when I rewatched the video this morning was I shouted out to the fact that we were an all-female panel, and that today we have Gabby, and also Lisa Lefson, our VP of Development, helped put this together, that we had women behind the scenes too. The Forward has a female CEO and publisher as well. I have to say, like, I don't think I would have commented on it today. I was like, of course I'll ask Tema and Sandra to do this. So, all right, we're gonna try to get through a couple more audience questions. David Almag asks, should Juneteenth be a national holiday? I think it actually has just become a national holiday, right? It's like about to be signed into law or something.
Well, there was a bill that was passed. I mean, I think there's a bill that was passed.
All right, well, so do
sure.
we think that Juneteenth should be a national holiday?
I'm for it.
Emma? Oh, you don't care. You're not even American.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is being
a Canadian holiday.
Sure. I think it should be an American national holiday. I wrote that I think the Jewish community should actually mark it by learning. And, that feels like light years ago, but I think that's really important. And the funny thing is that I actually, being the sole Canadian employee of an American organization, I am off for Juneteenth tomorrow. And I'm like, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I was saying to Tema before, my kids are off also from school. And I really do think this is one of those holidays that's better to be in school and have a day devoted to learning and discussion. But
the Reconstructionist movement gave all of its employees off for Juneteenth.
Yay for you, but except for you, who has to lead the service. But
right.
One more. Rachel English says, Sandra suggested that much of the work lies in having a personal relationship. I'd like to understand this better. Does it accomplish the same goal to have a trusted discussion group on race with white and Black participants who are not necessarily friends outside the group? And I think this question really,
it's a start.
But it builds off of what you said, Sandra, that you said a little casually, but I think it's like, it's really true, right? Like, most of us live in really segregated circles. Mm-hmm. Like, there's still a lot of both like housing segregation, school segregation. I mean, it's just like, so the opportunities to develop equal partnership friendships across identity lines are still, it's work. I mean,
so what I'll say, one of the things that I think is missing from these Zoom things is these hallway conversations. So like when we're in person and we're in a class or a workshop, you're learning. But then you leave that and then conversation continues. And that's where even more learning grows. And sometimes I would even argue most of the learning grows, because I've learned so much and changed people's hearts and minds from those hallway conversations that I think is part of what happens when you're in a group discussion. So I think it's a start. It's not an end, but it's definitely a start.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's because, it's also the laughing together about the food or the whatever, that where you find, that's where friendship kind of, that's where you follow up the next time and you're not asking for something specific. Any thoughts on the relationship building, Tema?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do so much of this in Jewish communal space, and a lot of the movement, especially like I come from large congregations, I was a membership director in large congregations, is about how do you build relationships across difference with people who are just like, two ships in the night. And when you're in something like a dialogue group, which is in many ways an older model of doing this sort of anti-racist work, but I think still a valid model when these are not people you would normally encounter. Doing that work, I think, is extremely important, but also building in time for that relationship building piece, like getting to know people, who they are, where they come from, because I think one of the things that is hard is like, if you're just coming together to talk about race and racism, it can very quickly turn into an exercise in self-flagellation on one side. And that does not help build relationships, right? The relationships are built by getting to know each other as humans and being able to deepen the conversation bit by bit by bit, and going forward from there. And I will say, this is not easy work, right? Like, if you don't feel a little bit uncomfortable every time you leave that kind of a conversation, go deeper.
Yeah, I'm gonna share a personal anecdote from yesterday, which I don't want to suggest that I think this has like great deep meaning, because this is not about a real relationship. But I do think that there are like, and this happened to me accidentally also, but I think there are little intentional things you could probably do in your life that would help foster these opportunities. So my kids graduated from 8th grade this week, which involved 2 separate, very hot ceremonies in an outdoor space on bleachers. And I was sitting with my family on a bleacher, and the folks right behind me were like awesome cheerers for their people, and they happened to be Black, and they were like totally, they had a bunch, I think it was 2 families, they had several graduates, so they were like several times, and I was like clapping with them for their people, and then like making some chit chat with them, which is just I mean, I just happened to be sitting next to them, and they were like particularly standout excellent clappers, so I was like making chit chat with them, and it was like, I like the fact that was happening across identities, and felt 100% normal. And, we're literally parents of the same kids in the same school, and but I also know that like, it is, first of all, true that most people don't go to, schools with that much diversity, but when you walk into a public space with open seating, I did not make some particular choice. My husband picked the seats, whatever. I don't know who got there first, but like, do you gravitate to sit next to somebody that looks like you or not? You can make then if you sit next to someone who doesn't look like you, and then you have a little snickering moment about the whatever, then maybe there's an opportunity to get to some conversation, or maybe that becomes the person you sit next to and show all the time. Just because, and I think I really don't want to exaggerate anything that I've done here, but like, it's a reminder that there might be little ways that you can open up those doors to make those bigger conversations happen. All right, we are at time. So if you have to leave us, I understand, but I am going to ask Sandra and Tema to share a small hope for what will have changed by the time we come back here next year for our 3rd annual Juneteenth conversation. And before I do that, I just want to thank again Gabby Brooks and Lisa Lepson for helping put this together. Thank all of you for coming. You will get the video in your inbox. You will also get a discount subscription offer for the Forward. I hope that you will take that and watch our free newsletters to follow all of our journalism, and join us for other Zoom events. And I hope that you have a reflective and peaceful Juneteenth, reading or davening or saying the Kaddish for Black Lives, or eating red velvet cake, which we didn't talk enough about this time, or whatever it is that you want to do with your people, and maybe with a new friend. So Tema, following our new tradition, I will ask you first, what do you hope will have changed when we get together in 2022?
I don't know if it's changed so much as sustained. I want to see a year from now that we're still talking about this, and that I guess the change there is that it's not at the same level, that it's deepening, that it's spreading, that more people are being engaged in this work, that more people are becoming visible in our communities, that Black Jews are feeling safer in Jewish spaces, like all of these things, as well as the racial justice conversations that are happening facing outside, more policies being enacted, more advocacy around, for example, voting rights, things like that happening facing outwards. So really, change, I think here is sustaining momentum. That's what I want to see. And that, by the way, feels like a huge change, because to me, it has always felt like we get some momentum, we lose the momentum. And then there's a crisis and we get some momentum and then we lose the momentum. So being able to keep that going.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
Rabbi,
I want to just take everything that Tema said. And I'll add, in my many conversations I've had with folks these past 3 months, my hope right now is that I want white folks in general, but more particularly white Jewish people, to recognize that Black and brown people do not have the same experiences that they do in Jewish spaces. And at least I'm not saying that they need to figure out what that is, but at least recognize it instead of assuming that it's all universal. Because when I have seen white folks realize that, it's like, oh, like you're not moving through the world the same way I am. That creates empathy, and it creates more room, space for learning and growing and coming together. And that's what I want. I want people to realize that the Black and brown people don't have the same experiences in this country. And that was by design, but at least let's get people to understand that. And everything Tema said.
I said I was going to let you have the last word, but I'm not. I'm going to have the last word because one of the things that you really taught me when you talked, I don't remember if it was your piece or last year in this conversation, when you talked about that the experience of Jews of color being asked about, like, so tell me your Jewish story, and explained so powerfully. And I lots of Jews of color have been talking about this, so I don't explain so powerfully how one of the things that came up for me when you said that was, I was like, but we love talking about our Jewish stories. Like I get asked that all the time. I ask people that all the time. I'm really interested in people's Jewish journeys and their backgrounds. But you explained how when that's connected to having just been asked by the security guard what you're doing there, that feels totally different. And it was very obvious as soon as you said it. And I have been really careful about not doing this. But so here's my hope, and I know it won't be done by 2022. So I'm going to now get you guys on the hook for 2032 when we'll be back, because I don't know, but I want to be in a synagogue where I can ask you your Jewish story the same way I would ask my white friend her Jewish story, and it won't make you uncomfortable because it'll just be about being interested in your whole thing. Did you go to Jewish camp, or it won't be like I'm challenging you. It will be like, I really want to know everything about your Judaism. And I mean, I hope I don't know if 10 years is too small, but I think that should be the goal, right? We of course should stop questioning people's belonging in the spaces, but if everybody will really belong when we can ask each other our origin stories or any stories on some kind of equal footing. So
amen.
I love that. I got an amen from the rabbi. By the way, I didn't even realize 3 years, you're like a baby rabbi.
I know.
I really thought you were like, I thought you had many more years. You were so wise. I did 3 years, like nothing.
I met Sandra in her first year of rabbinical school. So it's like very funny for me because 3 years does not feel like, but it's true.
No, actually, I've had senior rabbis say that to me, which I, would take with a lot of humility. Well, you've only been a rabbi for 3. I thought you've been a rabbi for so much. I said, no, thank you.
Well, it's interesting because obviously you are, we don't have to, there are many ways in which you are reshaping our image of what a rabbi is, but you are very rabbinic. You're very rabbinic all the time. Yeah. You bring rabbiness to your conversations and feels very natural to me.
Thank you.
All right. I guess I have to go to my next meeting. It's not going to be as interesting as this. Thank you both for being with us. Have what is the right thing to say? Have a peaceful Juneteenth. Have a reflective Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth. We should make something up. Juneteenth Sameach.
Sure. That sounds great
for me.
All right. And Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.